Hi there. In this week's edition of The Wrap, we're looking at South Africa's position on Russia and why not everything needs to be a Ramaphosa-style talk show. We also roll our eyes at the awkward PR moves made by companies trying to celebrate International Women's Day this week and celebrate the gains made by women who actually impressed us as top female judges are appointed for the first time in courts across the world. Plus, we break down how our economy saw its strongest growth in 14 years and what comes next. So let's dive into your weekly update of empowering and easy to understand news brought to you by myself, Verashni Pillay, and the Explained Akosa team. First up, South Africa flubs Russia vote. It's day 15 of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine and things keep escalating. 2 million refugees are said to have fled the Ukraine, and according to the UN, there have been 1,335 verified civilian casualties in the Ukraine, 474 deaths and 861 people injured. Now, one issue that comes to the fore is South Africa's place in all of this. Last week, our country decided to abstain from voting in the United Nations resolution against Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, one of 35 countries to do so. After a backlash, President Cyril Ramaphosa said the abstention was because the resolution failed to do his favorite thing, call for dialogue. The man who famously helped South Africa's warring sides negotiate a peaceful transition from apartheid has long been a fan of talk shops. It's an aspect of his leadership that's often criticized, but, as is often the case with our weaknesses, it's also one of his strengths. As he plaintively put it in his weekly missive to annoyed South Africans this week, the call for peaceful resolution through political dialogue is relegated to a single sentence close to the conclusion of the final text. Considering that we're a democratic country, the abstention was puzzling for several reasons, including the fact that we don't have strong trade relations with Russia. It's not like the economic formation we're part of with Russia. BRICS held us back either. Another BRICS country, Brazil, voted against Russia. Plus, there's Russia's blatant racism towards African residents fleeing the war. Ukraine is guilty of this too. More on this later. So there's little reason for South Africa to keep its relationship with Russia intact. Oh, and calling Russian President Vladimir Putin a man of peace won't earn you brownie points either, Jacob Zuma. We know you're besties thanks to that Russian nuclear deal, but seriously, read the room. The same could be said of Ramaphosa. At a time when the world's attention is fixed on the unfolding war, South Africa should be on the right side of history. Moving on to your big story, xenophobic opportunism. Xenophobic tension is on the rise again in Gauteng's townships, and there's a new organization driving it this time, Operation Dudula. A few weeks ago, Kaya FM reported that a group of Soweto and Alexandra residents marched to Hillbrow to remove undocumented foreign nationals by force. Things have intensified since then. On Monday, 3 Zimbabweans and a South African were injured during a clash between foreign nationals and people describing themselves as Dudula movement members in Alexandra. This organization is separate from Operation Dudula, it's worth noting. Now, the organizers of Operation Dudula deny that their actions are xenophobic and say they are saving the township's economies. But the fact is that South Africans are becoming increasingly hostile to foreigners. The hashtag Put South Africa First on social media continues to trend at times, offering a slightly diluted version of the more aggressive anti-foreigner sentiment we've seen in action this week and sadly so many times before. All of this is taking place against a backdrop of national politics that's becoming increasingly xenophobic. Herman Mashaba led the charge while at the DA and now is even more blatant as part of his popular Action South Africa formation. Others like the EFF, who were once anti-xenophobia, have jumped on board an anti-immigration wagon plucked straight out of Donald Trump's book of xenophobic tricks. Globally, the rise of the sort of right-wing sentiment does not happen in a vacuum. It's worth noting that Operation Dudula is partly led by Nhlanhla Lux, the man we once hailed as a hero for guarding Soweto's Maponya Mall from looters during the July unrest. But we may have erred. The country heaped praise on Lux when he worked outside the system for a just cause. The problem is that for him and many other angry and poor South Africans, fighting foreigners also appears to be a just cause and one they should take up arms for. It's not. As many experts note, this is misdirected anger as unemployment and food prices soar. It's easier to turn on one's neighbours, who is holding it together a little better and looks different, than to rail against structural problems and the political elites who are to blame. How ironic that it's these same elites encouraging xenophobia and distracting from their own failings in the process. It's utterly disgraceful. Moving on to your briefs, Twitter bot highlights gender pay gap. We love this story. Now, International Women's Day was celebrated this week and happens every year on March 8th. And it's not just an honor, not just an excuse to honor those who make up nearly 50% of the world's population. It's also become an occasion that causes many organizations' marketing divisions to completely malfunction. They either use tired tropes that paint absolutely all women as homemakers, mothers, and lovers of the color pink, or they unwittingly reveal their biases and shortcomings. This year, technology and a couple on a mission provided a twist by turning the day into a series we like to call Hypocritical Companies Getting Gloriously Trolled on Twitter. The UK couple created a little Twitter bot called @PayGapApp. As its Twitter bio puts it, employers, if you tweet about International Women's Day, I'll retweet your gender pay gap. The bot uses government data on British companies' gender pay that has, since 2017, been a matter of public record, the Washington Post reported, for companies with more than 250 employees. In 2020, according to the country's National Office for Statistics, women earned about 85% of what men did, meaning there was a 15% pay gap. And so the little pay gap set the cat among the pigeons on Tuesday. Many UK organisations boasting about their respect and support for women hurriedly deleted their posts when the bot revealed in-house pay gaps of up to, wait for it, 89%. It's great to see corporate and institutional hypocrisy revealed in real time. We shudder to think what a similar bot might highlight here in South Africa. Speaking of South Africa, one of the day's biggest local losers was Stellenbosch University. In a since-deleted tweet, the institution set out to celebrate the women at its senior management levels. Great idea, but pity that not a single black African woman featured. After a slew of justifiably angry responses, the tweet quietly vanished and a university spokesperson apologized. Moving on to Accountability Monitor, Bathabile Dlamini has been found guilty of perjury. Lie to me once, shame on you. Lie to me twice, and you're guilty of perjury. This one's for you, ANC Women's League President Bathabile Dlamini. Yesterday, the Johannesburg Magistrates Court found Dlamini guilty of perjury after she lied under oath about her role during a 2017 inquiry into the social grant saga. Dlamini, then the Minister of Social Development, put millions of South Africans' most vulnerable citizens at risk when her department messed around with a service provider responsible for dispersing grants. Dlamini will know her fate on her latest perjury case on the 1st of April. She may be asked to go to prison or pay a fine. The big question now is whether the ANC's recently hard-won step-aside rule will kick in, forcing Dlamini out as president of the ANC Women's League. If so, there's a fat paycheck awaiting the next incumbent. It was revealed in court that Dlamini earned 70,000 rand a month as ANC Women's League president, plus 40,000 rand in pension for her ministerial role. The Women's League may face the same fate as the now toothless ANC Youth League. There have been calls for the disbandment of the ANC Women's League, as the Daily Maverick has reported, reducing it to a task team. It has already been dissolved in 2 provinces. It is yet another sign of the ANC's decline after it repeatedly failed to take accountability seriously. This is not the first time Dlamini was convicted. She was found guilty of fraud in the 2003 Travelgate scandal when she was an MP. At that time, she simply paid a 120,000 rand fine after being found guilty and was later rewarded with a post in Jacob Zuma's cabinet, effectively a promotion. Action was never taken against the MPs as promised by the ANC in 2004. There was perhaps a tad more accountability when Ramaphosa became president. Dlamini was removed from her position as Minister of Social Development and moved to the portfolio for women, and then dropped completely from the cabinet in a reshuffle the following year. But the fact that she's kept her cushy Women's League job is shocking. The courts have yet again proven her guilt. Time for the ANC to act or risk being made even more irrelevant. Moving on to the economy, we've seen our best performance in 14 years. We know, it's hard to think of South Africa's economy and good news in the same breath. But trust us on this one, there is some reason to celebrate. It centers on the GDP, a measure of how big our economy is. That is, how many goods and services are being sold. Stats SA measures this every 3 months and on Tuesday released the data for the end of 2021. This means we now have the full picture for 2021 and it's good news. Last year in total saw our biggest annual growth in 14 years. For the full year, GDP expanded at 4.9%, the biggest increase since 2007, before the global financial crisis. That's a huge improvement from the 6.4% contraction in 2020, that dark year that we don't like talking about. But it's not all sunshine, as our wallets and petrol gauges attest. The bigger the economy, the more jobs and money going around, so we need more growth. The crappy bit is that there's plenty ahead to threaten 2021's fragile growth. ongoing local bugbears like power cuts, thanks Eskom, and now the war brewing in Europe, thanks Russia, pose a threat to our further growth. Plus, last year's positive growth could have been even better if it wasn't for the July looting and ongoing service delivery and policy problems. There's also a concern about jobless recovery. That means we have all this growth but no jobs to show for it. It's a general problem with South Africa's economy. Professional services like finance have increasingly dominated our economy and are responsible for this growth, while historical sectors like mining have declined. Our job market just isn't keeping up. Thanks, South African education. We have loads of unskilled workers and a fair amount of vacancies for highly skilled jobs. You can read or watch more about this issue and what we think about it in our previous explainer in the link below. On to adulting. If you're driving with an expired license, this is your final reminder. Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula said this week that his department will not extend the grace period for expired licenses beyond the end of this month after all. So that means 31st of March is your last deadline. The massive backlog is a result of the national COVID-19 lockdowns imposed in 2020 and 2021 that forced licensing centres to close. Mbalula, aka Mr. Fix, as he ironically calls himself on Twitter, said that motorists who fail to meet the deadline will face fines and possible prosecution. We are increasing our capacity, he said, so the backlog will not be an issue. I am making a call for people to go out and renew their cars because we won't extend the grace period, said Mbalula. It's a controversial decision given the issues with renewing our licenses after the lone printing machine broke down, as we told you about, and was sent for repairs, and the closure of several licensing centres across Gauteng following protests about the new electronic system that we told you about last week. In other news, you might be reading this by candlelight because South Africa's most unwelcome guest, load shedding, is back. Eskom says stage 4 load shedding will be implemented from 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning until 5 a.m. on Friday. You can find your schedule online, charge your power banks, and stock up on candles. On to some women economic news, or empowerment news rather, that really is worth celebrating. Glass ceilings shatter in courts across the world. There's been a slew of historic female appointments to courts across the globe, and we're here for it. In the US, President Joe Biden has made good on his promise to appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court, which is their highest court. 2 weeks ago, he appointed Justice Ketanji Jackson, making her possibly the most qualified candidate to ever take up a seat in the US's apex court. In the US, justices notoriously don't technically need a law degree. Maybe John Steenhuisen has options after all. Jackson is one of the most experienced candidates for the job with a 25-year-long career as a public defender and lawyer in private practice. All Jackson now needs is the stamp of approval of the Senate, similar to our parliament here in South Africa. She needs 51 votes to secure her lifetime appointment in the court, which she will likely get as the Democratic Party, which Biden leads, holds the majority in Senate. In South Africa, we are also likely to have our first woman leading our court system, Justice Mandisa Maya. That's if the ever-indecisive President Cyril Ramaphosa were to give his go-ahead for the Constitutional Court Chief Justice appointment, which is now vacant for nearly 140 days. And yes, we're counting. On the continent, Egypt just appointed its first woman judge to the State Council, a top court in the country. Judge Radwa Hami's appointment makes historic strides towards equality in Egypt, a country that has been heavily criticized for its ongoing assault on women's rights. Plus, last year, Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta made Chief Justice Martha Koome the first woman to lead the country's top court. There's much to do, but these important appointments are worth celebrating. Finally, Chicken Licken clucks it up. The retailer, famous for its hot wings and soul food, made headlines this week for an action that lacked any soul, threatening legal action against a self-catering lodge that dared to use the word soul in its name. The Durban lodge, called Soul House, insists it was not trying to be spicy and was astonished to receive a letter from Chicken Licken demanding a name change. Soul House, though, won't be bullied, saying it does not sell food and therefore does not need to remove the word from its name. But Chicken Licken's lawyers are licking their lips, insisting they'll go to court if Soul House does not blink first in this game of chicken. We're sorry, but we're not sorry for all these puns. The fast food chain has gone to court to enforce its soul food and soul trademarks previously, but lost on both occasions. We love those hot wings as much as the next person, but WTF? Does Chicken Licken have an enormous legal budget it really loves spending, or is this some perverse form of marketing? Come on, Chicken Licken, save the heat for your cooking. That's it from us at The Wrap, an award-winning product for Explain.co, simple news summaries for busy people. The Wrap is sponsored by Explain's agency division, who specialize in content marketing for purpose-driven organizations, often with a pan-African reach. Mail info at Explain.co for a quote. And lastly, remember to share the love. Tell your friends to sign up for the updates at Explain.co/subscribe. Till next time, goodbye from the team.